Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever wondered how a single dollar spent can just magically turn into $2 or $3 of total economic growth? It sounds wild, but it happens. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating mechanics of income determination and the economic ripple effect. We're going to break down exactly how money moves, how it multiplies, and, well, how it sometimes gets totally stuck in our macroeconomy. Here's the roadmap for today's explainer. First, intentions versus economic reality. Second, shifting the economic curve. Third, finding the economic equilibrium. Fourth, the multiplier mechanism. And finally, number 5, the paradox of thrift. All right, section 1, intentions versus economic reality, or as economists like to say, ex ante versus ex post. So, let's nail down this term ex ante. It literally just means before the event. In our context today, we're talking about planned business investment or planned consumption in the economy over a given period, based entirely on future expectations. Think of it like the economic blueprint drawn up before the period even kicks off. It's what people intend to do. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension here. On one side, we have ex ante investment, right? The planned expectations. But on the other side, we have ex post investment, which is the actual realized outcome for that period. Because, what a business actually plans to invest isn't always what they end up investing if market conditions unexpectedly shift. Reality kind of gets in the way. Moving on to section 2, shifting the economic curve and the math behind the movement. Now, please don't let the math intimidate you here. It's actually quite elegant once you see it. The economy's dashboard basically operates just like the standard equation of a straight line from algebra class, y equals mx plus c. I want you to think of M and C as the actual dials that control our economy. Here, M represents the slope, which in economics we call the marginal propensity to consume. Basically, that just means how much of every extra dollar you earn goes straight towards spending. And C, well, that's the intercept, representing autonomous spending. That is the baseline, bare minimum spending that just has to happen, regardless of what the overall income level is. So what happens when we start turning these dials? We get what's called a parametric shift. If the marginal propensity to consume decreases, that whole consumption curve shifts downward, right? Because people are spending a smaller fraction of their new income. If baseline autonomous spending jumps, the curve shifts upward in parallel. And it's absolutely crucial to note that this is entirely different from a simple movement along the curve. A movement along the curve only happens when national income itself changes, while those foundational dials stay exactly the same. Understanding this difference between shifting the entire curve versus just moving along it tells us exactly how aggregate demand is truly behaving out there. Okay, section 3, finding the economic equilibrium and the point of effective demand. So, effective demand. This is the exact equilibrium point in Keynesian theory where aggregate demand perfectly equates to aggregate supply. If we're looking at a short-run, fixed-price analysis of the product market, this one specific point on the aggregate demand curve actually dictates the real output level of our economy. It is the sweet spot. It's exactly where buyers' willingness to spend perfectly meets sellers' capacity to produce. Let's step through the algebra together to see how this equilibrium reveals something incredibly powerful. Step 1. We set aggregate demand equal to income, so y equals a plus cy. Step 2. We isolate autonomous expenditure, that's the A, so A equals y minus cy. Step 3, we just factor out the y to get A equals y times 1 minus c. And finally, step 4, solve for y, which gives us y equals A divided by 1 minus c. Boom! That little formula right there, that is the autonomous expenditure multiplier. It proves mathematically how the effects of an autonomous change on equilibrium demand in the product market literally ripple outward. A tiny change in autonomous spending multiplies into a massively larger change in total income. Which brings us perfectly to section 4, the multiplier mechanism, following the money. The fiscal multiplier is basically the ratio of change in national income that arises from a change in government spending or autonomous investment. Interestingly enough, this whole concept was introduced way back in 1931 by a guy named Richard Kahn. He was a student of John Maynard Keynes, and he initially came up with this as a way to rigorously justify public works spending to combat mass unemployment during the Great Depression. All right, let's make this abstract formula tangible. Let's follow the money. Imagine this. The government decides to spend $1 million to build a new factory. The main builder takes that million, nets $200,000 in income for themselves, and then pays subcontractors the remaining $800,000.
Well, those subcontractors now have brand new disposable income, right? And they're going to spend a portion of it based on their marginal propensity to consume, buying groceries, paying rent, maybe buying a car. So suddenly, the grocery store owner and the landlord have new income, and the cycle just repeats. The money doesn't just disappear into a void, it flows and it multiplies.
Because of this continuous flow, the total increase in production ends up being way greater than that original $1 million increment. The exact extent of this ripple effect depends heavily on the marginal propensity to consume, basically how much people choose to spend versus how much they stash away in savings at every single step. But it is absolutely crucial to note that this cycle is ultimately limited by the available spare capacity in the economy. Think about it. If everyone is already fully employed and factories are totally maxed out, throwing extra spending into the mix might just cause prices to inflate rather than actually growing real production. So, how does this actually hold up outside of an economics textbook? Let's move from theory to real-world application here. We're going to look at some estimated fiscal multipliers calculated by Mark Zandi at Moody's Analytics, specifically analyzing the real-world impact of the 2008 fiscal stimulus policies in the United States. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between these different policies. Look at this. Temporary food stamps generated a massive multiplier of 1.73, meaning every single dollar spent created $1.73 in economic activity. A refundable tax rebate sat at 1.26, while making the Bush tax cuts permanent had a multiplier of only 0.29. The math here simply shows us that policies targeting lower-income households, whose spending is usually highly constrained, tend to have higher multipliers. Why? Because those households spend their extra money almost immediately, which aggressively feeds that multiplier cycle we just talked about.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the paradox of thrift, a counterintuitive twist.
I want to pose a theoretical question to you. What if everyone in the economy gets worried about the future and decides to save a much larger proportion of their income at the exact same time? On a personal level, it sounds like a highly responsible thing to do, right? You save for a rainy day.
Well, actually, it introduces what we call the paradox of thrift. The paradox is this. If everyone increases the proportion of income they save simultaneously, the total value of savings in the economy will actually not increase, and it might even decline. Crazy, right? But think about why. When everyone suddenly stops spending, businesses lose revenue, they have to lay off workers, and total national income drops. This simultaneous saving leads to lower employment and actively slows down economic growth. It's a foundational, honestly somewhat terrifying component of Keynesian economics. What is perfectly rational for you as an individual can be absolutely destructive macroeconomically.
It really forces you to look at the world a little differently, doesn't it? So as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this final thought. Take a look at the latest government stimulus policy, or even your own savings account. Are you helping the multiplier, or are you feeding the paradox? It's a delicate, massive balancing act that pretty much runs our entire modern economy. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep exploring these incredible economic forces.